Hello, Anthony Asquith of Affinity Training and Dentcom Training. Good afternoon, I hope you're well. As you can see in the last day or so, the weather has changed considerably. We had a terrible pour just over the Guy Fawkes period for bonfire. And basically, we're all going to have to start wrapping up warmer more. And one of the things that many of us will be wearing this time of year is a scarf, to keep us warm. But what has a scarf got to do with basic human needs? As I said, apart from keeping us warm. One of the first things to talk about is the idea that SCARF is an acronym for a model designed by a guy called David Rock, who's an Australian neuroscientist, and he looks at the whole concept of human needs. And if you take SCARF, the letters for SCARF are S, C, A, R and F, and he uses this as an acronym to describe human needs. Before getting onto human needs, I just want to ask you a quick question. I want to just check back with you. His argument is, and I completely agree with it, his argument is that the brain as such is a social device, really. And so he asks the question, if you're not currently doing something or thinking about a task, okay, chances are you're going to be probably thinking about yourself or other people. So just take a moment to have a think about that. If you're not involved in a task or thinking about doing a task, you're probably going to be thinking about yourself or other people. How's that sit with you? If you're happy to agree that, fabulous. Most people are. Most sane people are anyway. So, why on earth do we need a scarf? Why on earth do we need a scarf in our life? Well, scarf, as I said, is a basic human need. And one of the first things scarf produces is what we call status. Status. Now, when we first meet people for the very first time, part of our brain scans the environment around us, scans the interaction, looks at how we are behaving, how they're behaving towards us, and does minor checks to ensure that we feel we're being given first status by the other person. I'll give you an example of this. Just in the last half hour, I got back from PC World, the computer business, and I was with my mum, about to say my wife, and probably the same thing, and we were in dealing with a computer issue that my mother had problems with, and she went on to talk about the fact that the week before she had been dealt what I thought was a bit of a cruel blow from a guy who worked in the same department, and he couldn't be more disinterested in her if she could possibly create the story. He then went on to call her a silly old woman, and amongst other things, and then went on to suggest that this is the kind of problem that could be fixed by a 9-year-old. Not great on the customer service front. On the other hand, when we went to the second time to deal with another character, this gentleman was absolutely brilliant, couldn't do enough for us, couldn't bend over enough to help out, and preserved our status. So what I'm saying here is, when we feel that our status is being met, certain pleasure chemicals in our brain fire off, like dopamine, endorphins, and oxytocin. And I'll come back onto those in a minute. You'll see there's a kind of interesting psychological loop here. However, when our status is threatened, we produce things like cortisol and noradrenaline, the fight or flight responses. So that's the first letter of SCARF, is status. And it's really, really important in anything you do in life, anything you interact with other people, how people interact with you, is all about status. The second is certainty. As human beings, we crave it. Our brain needs to have it in play. Because without it, if we experience things like ambiguity in situations, this type of stuff can make us feel very uncomfortable very quickly. If you're having situations where you're not in control of situations and you feel there's uncertainty, it can really cause problems. Some of you listening to this video may have had your job threatened at some point in recent years because of economic uncertainties, and you've been told, well, maybe this might happen, this might happen. Some of you probably had appraisals, and you're thinking to yourself, when the boss says, oh, I'd like to give you some constructive feedback, come in for an appraisal on Thursday next week, immediately you're thinking, oh Christ. Because what's existing here is ambiguity. Some of you have probably been on dates recently. Some of you have been probably on a few dates recently. Some of you have marital issues, sometimes have challenges. And because of that, these uncertainties that exist, these ambiguities, can cause the creation of chemicals like cortisol and noradrenaline. So certainty, so we have status, we have certainty, that are basic needs within our experience of the world. What are the other needs if you think about the SCARF model? So the next one is the A, autonomy. In order for us to experience a pleasurable life, we need to be in a position of empowerment with the way the world works for us. It's really useful to be able to understand that we have choices and we have control in the kinds of choices that we make. There was some amazing research done in the 70s by a lady called Helen Langer. And what they found was that if they gave choices to old people living in a care home about the type of food they could have, their health, and these are just small choices, their health was often significantly better than similar aged old people with similar conditions where they had little or no choice in the types of food. And this was just one of those little tiny things. So if you're working for a company or if you're working for a business, the fact that they give you the choice to decide how you spend your time or work within certain protocols, some of them you'll have agreed with, how the job gets done, they give you some independence to be able to act for yourself and do things for yourself. These are very useful for you. What we do know, for example, is from research done in Whitehall, the government departments in Whitehall, the lower down the autonomy scale you are, in other words, if you're a low-ranking civil servant in Whitehall, I mean, let's be fair, you're not pushing coal trucks around like you might have done several hundred years ago. You're probably moving a mouse. You've got paperwork that you deal with, much like the bosses that you have. But what you probably may not have is the choice of how you do things in the workplace. Now, as a consequence of that, what we do see, for example, from research over the last 40 years of nearly 30,000 people, is those people who feel that they have less control or lack autonomy actually have much worse health-related issues in their lives because they feel continually stressed because they don't have choice or control by comparison to their bosses. In other words, it's not the case that the bosses are too important to be stressed. They get stressed, but because they feel they have greater levels of autonomy in decisions, it means that they tend to have better levels of health. So that's the third letter, that we've got the status, certainty, autonomy in life, in SCARF. A really powerful one is also relatedness. Now, I don't know how well you can see this particular picture, but if I bring it a little bit closer like that, you can see a little white man standing outside, isolated on his own. To feel isolated or ostracized is an extraordinarily stressful situation to find yourself in. If you feel that you're working with a business or in a company and the people don't understand you, don't understand the work you do, they introduce changes in your work that you don't see the point in, you know what? You're going to get really stressed out. You're going to have cortisol and noradrenaline floating around because they don't get you. They don't understand the work you do. When we meet people as individuals, because there's so much stimulus going on around us, our subliminal responses are to immediately begin to search for areas in which we have a sense of connection, a sense of sameness within ourselves. So when you meet people, for instance, you find you'll often particularly start talking to them about who they know, where they've worked, Maybe you've shared a kind of similar job role that they've done. Perhaps you've experienced some of the things that they've experienced. Perhaps you know of people who have shared similar experiences to them. And by connecting in these ways and ensuring that you have relatedness with the other person, it means that things like dopamine, like oxytocin, and the endorphin chemicals, which bind us together as human beings, work really well. And so if you are able to strike up a conversation, even with strangers, just a little smile to a person in a cafe or something like that, just, like that, hi, and not even say anything, but if you walk down the road and you kind of do this to someone, they immediately will smile back. They can't help themselves, because the brain of the software of their brain automatically works that way. It looks for things that in some way can we link together to produce oxytocin. If of course you give people looks like that as you walk down the street, then automatically they're going to have status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness issues kind of flying around in their heads, and before you know it, they're feeling unconsciously stressed by you as a person. If you're walking down the street and several people do that to you, you're probably going to get really freaked. Okay, so we've now got the status, the certainty, the autonomy, the relatedness, and the big one, I think, is what we call fairness. Okay, the sense that whatever's happening in interactions in our lives, the people we deal with, the things that go on in our lives, that we are experiencing an equal transaction of energy to money. Some of you work in jobs, and hopefully some of the pay that you receive will be good pay. Some of you may not. And you might find yourself thinking, I work like crazy, and these customers, they're right bastards, and they treat me that way. I shouldn't have to deal with this sort of stuff, or I shouldn't have to do this kind of job. And that's all to do with how you think and how you believe the things. But this is relinking to the concept of fairness. Let me give you some typical examples of fairness. Have you ever, for example, been kept waiting by a delivery service where they say, yeah, we're going to arrive, Mrs. Reese, Mrs. Smith, we're going to arrive at 1 o'clock, and you book some time off from work to be there to meet them. Lo and behold, however, they do the exact opposite. 4 o'clock, the delivery van still hasn't arrived. You've rung 4 or 5 times, it's been engaged. Can you imagine how stressed you can get from that? And that's because there's no sense of certainty, no autonomy, you can't control it. You try to ring up, they say, yeah, it's on its way, we'll be there soon. And then suddenly you're again spinning into a game of, well, is this fair that I've given up my time, my energy, I've given up probably my working wage that particular day to be there, only to find that bastard didn't arrive or turn up on time, if at all. Have you ever had problems with gas suppliers, telephone suppliers, where you feel you've been overcharged, or something they said they were going to do, they didn't do? Maybe you're in a relationship with someone and they say, well, I'll arrive on XYZ, and they'll turn up, but they never do, and they never arrive on time, and you'd have the grace and the beauty to arrive. Can you see all this type of stuff is really, really important? And whatever you're doing in life, however you're interacting, or whoever you're acting with, all these areas must be in some way touched upon. So we need status, we need certainty, we need autonomy, we need relatedness, and we also need fairness. Now these are really, really key to our existence. And let me show you exactly why. Here's the brain, okay? And you can see that if you were to physically be hit by someone, the actual experience of pain isn't felt at the site of the impact, okay? Information comes from that, say you hit on the arm or the shoulder or the back of the head like that. It's not actually in that part of the body that you feel the physical pain. It travels from the site into your nociceptors and goes straight up into your brain to a region in the brain, as you can see here, called the cingulate anterior cortex. Those little shaded bits, just where my finger is there, yeah, those little shaded bits. So if someone, for example, kicks you in the leg, the region of the brain that will experience the pain is in this cingulate anterior cortex. We know this from what we call functional magnetic resonance imaging. So people in pain will often show this region of the brain lit up through oxygenation, blood flow, and temperature change. Okay on that? Okay, so pain is not felt at the site, pain is felt in the brain, in this region here. What we also now know, and this is really bizarre, is when we feel that we're not getting our fair share of life, the scarf is being affected, something really rather bizarre happens. If you look at the two diagrams again, the top, Matthew Lieberman in 2004 discovered something really, really fantastic and amazing. Basically, when we find ourselves feeling uncertain, when we feel no autonomy, when we feel no relatedness with people, when we feel we've been cheated, disappointed by other people for fairness purposes, when we feel people have taken the piss out of us for status purposes, look at the region of the brain again which lights up. It's the same region in social pain as in physical pain. Do you see that? If you take the other side of the example, there's the physical pain lighting up at the cingulate anterior cortex. And there's the social pain. The same region of the brain lights up. What I'm saying here is when we find ourselves feeling ostracized, disappointed, angered by other people, cheated, despairing of others and their actions and behaviors, it's almost we're being physically attacked. What do you think of that? Now, what I'd like to have you do, if you wish to do it, just for fun, is if you wish to, on the email or in Facebook, when you're responding to this, just put a quick couple of lines about what happened when your status, your certainty, autonomy, relatedness and fairness was affected. Have a little think about situations that have occurred, maybe are occurring currently, okay, that are happening around you, are happening to you, that have affected these areas of your life. And you can definitely tell when you're feeling experiences of these that this region of the brain, the frontal right-hand lobe, is lighting up like a Belushi beacon, okay? Now, there's nothing wrong with you, there's nothing right about it, it is just what it is to be human. In the next blog, I'm going to be talking about how quickly you can use tools and techniques to relax very quickly, to really become from a state of arousal to a state of calmness within 6 to 7 minutes. And that, I am sure you'd agree, is an amazing deal. But what else can you do about managing status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness and fairness? What can you do practically over the next week or two to get things working in your favour? Now you're more aware of this type of stuff, of status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness and fairness, you might want to also think about the opportunity as it's coming up, and I'm not going to be running too many of these because they're just so amazing, but I'm making them quite difficult to get to, and if you want to get to them, you better book quickly. Is come to my workshop on the 14th of November, Saturday the 14th of November in the morning at the Cornerstone. You'll see the details down below on the Eventbrite page. Click on that, you can book tickets, buy tickets, whatever you want to do. Bring your friend, bring a couple of friends. Hey, let's have a party. We're going to look at the behaviour styles, temperamental styles, all sorts of clever stuff around status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness and fairness. Some of the great things you can do to work with other people, be more successful and have a happier life. Now, isn't that a good deal for £37.76? Get on the book yourself in, get a couple of tickets and we'll see you soon. Have fun, bye!